Hey everyone, Tin Man here with patch 1.28 rundown. So I'm of the unpopular opinion that I actually really like this patch a lot. I like a lot of the changes that they've made. While maybe they should have made one change that they didn't, I think on the whole this is a very good balanced patch for the game. So I hope over the course of this video I can explain exactly why. So let's start with the updates to the Dusk Road draft format. So a lot of this in here talks about how they'll change which computer drafts which packs. So you'll get the same person picking both Dusk Road packs, the first and the last. So instead of pass left right left, if you were in a real draft, it's now pass left right right left. They also say that they increase the algorithm for making more diversity. A lot of this is kind of hand wavy. There's no concrete details here. Suffice to say, I hope they made a good change, and we'll see how that pans out. But it's kind of hard to make any concrete comments on just those amount of details. Now, for the actual card changes, I like the Valkyrie Arcanist change, up its cost to 6 instead of 5, and Frontier Confessor, it drops its cost but also drops its stats rather dramatically. Those two buffs or nerfs rather are quite good. Justice was definitely the most powerful faction, and those were two of the most powerful cards in Justice. Emerald Spear, on the other hand, getting a nerf in that it's going up 1 power cost, but only plus 1 power. This card is not very good as is. It's like very borderline playable if you have a heavy Valkyrie deck, and even then it's not great. So I don't think this was justified nerf at all. But regardless, if you make a bad card, nerf it even more. Doesn't really affect anything, right? Because no one good should have been playing that card anyway. Clean up rules around void interaction. So it doesn't seem like Statuary Maiden actually changed. It just reads differently. I think its functionality is still identical, which I think is fine. I think Statuary Maiden was a perfectly good card. Steward of the Past, though, got a pretty heavy nerf. Instead of entering it says, wait, so what is it? The summon effect is the same, but it no longer has its second line of text that is kind of the constant silence. That led to some really weird interactions, and it was just an all-around too powerful of a hate card for graveyards, or for voids, rather. So I compare this to a game like Magic the Gathering, where there's a lot of graveyard hate cards, but very few of them are as all-encompassing as, say, Steward of the Past was. I guess there is Rest in Peace in Magic the Gathering, which is kind of the catch-all in graveyard hate. But for most of the other graveyard hates, they are kind of targeted at specific things. So one might be a one-time remove their whole graveyard. One might be a cards can't leave the opponent's graveyard, or maybe you can't target cards in the graveyard, or different variations on that, but not a all-encompassing silence everything every time, no matter what. I think that led him to be a little bit too powerful, and also the 3/5 stat line made him very difficult to kill. So overall, I thought Steward of the Past was too strong of a card, so I'm happy to see a nerf on him. It also helps to promote diversity in the types of graveyard answers or void answers that are out there. So I hope they can expand on this design space. I hope they can add more cards that interact with the void or hate on the void in different and unique ways, other than just blanket silencing everything or blanket preventing things from happening with it. Individual card changes. So this is where we get to the meat of the post. So Dawnwalker now requires quad time influence in order to return. So I love this change. I really do. I thought Dawnwalker was way too powerful of a card with way too low of an opportunity cost. So when you're playing a card as powerful as Dawnwalker, you should have some sort of drawback. You should have to work for its trigger, right? When you're going to get a trigger to rebuy a 4/1 with Overwhelm, you should have to work for that. Unfortunately, most time decks really didn't. Every card they wanted to play that cost more than Dawnwalker would trigger him back anyway. We're talking Sandstorm Titan, Heart of the Vault, World Bearer Behemoth. All of those cards just kind of free rolled, like, oops, since I have this guy, why not just play him because he fits so perfectly? Like, you don't need to really think about, oh, how do I optimize playing guys who have 5 more power to bring him back, because every card in time is already that big. So there wasn't really any trade-offs there. So now it actually introduces a nice trade-off where you have to consider what your time influence is. If you're a heavy time deck, this is really no drawback at all. It's pretty much the same power level as it used to be. However, this is a bigger drawback for decks that were running 2 colors, the Praxis, Xenon. I don't think any Combre decks were running it. But regardless, you now need to think about something else in order to get this very powerful effect. And don't get me wrong, Dawnwalker is still a powerful card. Now you just need to make some trade-offs in order to play with that power. And I think that introduces interesting design decisions and, reduces the just generic, oh, this card's really good, why would I not play it? I don't like when that's the deck building decision. The deck building decision tree is, this card's really good, why would I not play it? There should be some answer to that question, and now there is. So I like this change a whole lot. It's my favorite change in this patch, for sure. Elysian Trailblazer and Pathfinder. The Trailblazer is pretty irrelevant. Change that card's not really playable. Elysian Pathfinder, on the other hand, that's the guy who gives Echo. That hurts like the Echo Makto, Echo Tavrod deck that RNG Eternal just posted the other day. Now you need double time influence in order to cast him instead of just a single. On one hand, this is a little disappointing for the Echo decks because they were never top tier, but I can understand that they are a very powerful card to splash for, and often when you have consistent 4-color decks, that's probably a sign that either your mana fixing is too good or your color requirements are not enough on cards. So I like that change. Withering Witch now only hits undamaged enemies. So this was a very confusing card that if you had already damaged them and then you set their health to 1, then they just instantly die, which doesn't make sense. It makes sense in Magic rules, but in Eternal rules, they're a little bit different. So there's some weird interactions there that even veteran players might not understand. So I think this clears up a lot of it. It is a nerf to the card in some sense, but I think it's a reasonable nerf. It's still its intended play pattern of play it, make their guys weak, and then play a removal spell, and then make good blocks is still there. Still leaves that intact. So I think it's a good overall change for clarity purposes, which is very important in digital card games where there's not the rule book. In Magic the Gathering, they have the comprehensive rules. You don't have that here. So clarifying interactions when possible is always advisable in digital card games. Black Sky Harbinger got a buff to 4/5. It's actually a nerf since now it can die to Vanquish, which is a very popularly played removal spell that obviously only hits guys who have 4 power or more. Unfortunately, I don't think this is as big of a nerf as you might think. First off, the 4/5, 1 extra damage of lifesteal per turn is kind of the essentially 2 extra attack, right? Because you get to heal 1 extra and you deal 1 extra. It also lets it interact favorably with some extra attackers, now being able to block with 4 toughness instead of just 3. So on the whole, I think this is a slightly net positive, especially when you consider that most decks that run Black Sky Harbinger also run many other cards that die to Vanquish, and so this guy could potentially bait out removal spells that might have hit a Vara, that might have hit a Champion, or whatnot. So I think on the whole this is a slight buff, which might not have been justified. Devastating Setback. So this is a card that originally cost 4 and gave -2/-2 permanently, or cast Sabotage. So the Sabotage mode hasn't been changed, it now costs 3 total, and just is -2/-2 this turn. Which, if I'm understanding the way this interacts properly, it's essentially just -2 health. The -2 power, since it's just a spell, it's not a fast spell, is probably never really going to be relevant. The way I like to think about this card now is it's essentially an extra Lightning Storm for decks that want Lightning Storm, or in the Feln decks that want to run extra Lightning Storms, they can now run more that only cost 3 instead of 2, and it still doubles as a Sabotage against the control decks. So I still think this is a very good card. It's going to be played a lot. However, the more I'm thinking about it, this might just push more of those weenie style decks that run a lot of 1-drops and 2-drops that all die to Lightning Storm. They might push them further and further out of the meta. They're already pretty low on the meta tier list, but it might push them even farther out, which I personally think is a shame because I love those types of decks. But on the whole, it's not as devastating as you think, mainly because a lot of the better aggro decks right now don't rely on too many guys who die Lightning Storm. They rely on bigger flyers, such as Huru flyers, or they rely on charge units who they'll at least get some value before they get hit with a devastating setback. Or some of the Rakano decks that run, say, Whirling Duo, who this just, it's a nerf against Whirling Duo because it just gains the power and toughness right back. Torgav, Icecap Trader, and Alu Death Dreamer. These cards were very underpowered for what they were. Torgav is now probably quite playable. Alu Death Dreamer, I would be impressed if it was playable, but I'd be happy to see it work. But I'm not holding my breath for that one. I think you'll see Torgav pop up in a couple Felon lists, though, now that it's a lot easier to proc. Another big change here is Argenport Instigator goes to 2 Shadow Shadow instead of just 2 Shadow. This is a significant nerf to Bandit Queen decks. I'm not going to take a side here on the proper naming convention on that deck, but Fire Shadow aggro decks definitely took a hit here. It's hard to cast a Fire 1-drop into a Shadow 2-drop without having a Sigil or a Seat, or sorry, no, not a Sigil. You need a Shadow Sigil plus like a Seat of Chaos or something. So it'll be more inconsistent. But on the whole, I still think Stone Scar aggro decks are still quite good. They'll still play this card. It just will be maybe slightly less consistent. Which I don't think this card was kind of devastating, or this deck wasn't really devastating the competitive scene, but it was probably a pretty popular deck on ladder, which was leading to some frustration. People don't like to lose at all, really, but they don't like to lose quickly. If they want to be playing a game, they want to be able to feel like they were able to compete, feel like they were able to interact with the opponents. And I completely understand that, and I understand why they need to nerf any aggro deck that, makes it extremely difficult to interact with or is too consistent at the lower ranks, because that's where the vast majority of the player base is. Not everyone is playing in the ETS trying to top 8. So even though Stone Scar aggro is not top 8ing, I think it was a menace enough on ladder, and it made people feel bad enough that this slight nerf to consistency is probably warranted. So Stone Powder Alchemist, this is a huge change, reducing it from 4 cost down to 3. Not sure I agree with this one. I think it was quite well balanced at 4. Pushing it to 3 now makes it an auto include in a lot more decks. I think it'll definitely see play in just standard Argenport mid-range now, possibly in the spot of Argenport Instigator, because this card got nerfed, this card got buffed. You can probably swap them and not lose too much. It does give gunslinger strategies a little bit more tools, which with the hideout pistol buff, I think you might see gunslingers, Argenport gunslingers pop up a little bit more. This card is kind of an anti-aggro card, but I'm not even convinced that it's that good of a one in the current in the new meta, because partially due to the devastating setback change that really made this an extra Lightning Storm rather than a different card on its own. Those kind of weenie decks that rely on 1s and 2-drops are the decks where Stone Powder Alchemist is best against. But now Devastating Setback is not very good against decks that are trying to run 3/3s or flyers and so on. And Stone Powder Alchemist isn't really good against the decks with 3/3s or flyers either. I mean, it's fine. It's an acceptable card, but it's not like a brick wall that he is against, a bunch of 1-drops. So I think those type of aggro decks, so unfortunately my favorite deck, the Praxis Nightmare aggro deck, is probably going to get hit by these changes quite a bit. Obviously Devastating Setback is going to hurt it a lot. Stone Powder Alchemist hit is going to hurt it quite as well. The rest of these changes in the Duskguard buffs I don't think are going to make too much of a difference. I wouldn't be surprised to see, maybe a Talir's Intervention, since it can just straight silence anything instead of an attacker. Maybe that sees some fringe play, but on the whole, I don't think too many of the other changes, other than Hideout Pistol, I think that is a big change, and you'll see some Gunslinger decks pop up because of it. The rest of it, not so much. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the cow in the room. Tavrod is not mentioned at all on these patch notes, and that is something that I heavily disagree with. I think Tavrod should have gotten some nerf. I think it should have got a nerf like Dawnwalker. I don't think you should change its power, its toughness, or its cost. I don't really think you should add an influence requirement because he already has a heavy influence requirement. Rather, what I think you should do is you should make the person work for it. Work for the benefit. It is a very powerful effect, no doubt. You know, getting potentially to draw 2 cards. But you shouldn't just get that for free just for playing the guy. You shouldn't just get Dawnwalker's Resurrect trigger for free just for playing a time deck. So what I would propose, a Tavrod nerf. I know they're not going to do it now because they already released this patch. Maybe for next patch, maybe they'll take this advice. The nerf I would propose is something along the lines of Tavrod is still a 5-cost, 5/7 with endurance. It says whenever he attacks, if you control another Minotaur or another weapon, or just a weapon, I guess, if you control another Minotaur or a weapon, then you get his current effect. So that means you're not just playing, oh, I'm playing Argenport, why would I not play Tavrod? Of course he's the best. Now you have to think, well, I need to play enough weapons and Minotaurs so that A, I can consistently draw them off of Tavrod, but B, also that you can consistently have one out when you want to attack with Tavrod. I'm not sure that exact wording or that exact effect is the correct nerf, partially because, you know, there's not a lot of room for counterplay. If someone just plays the weapon then attacks, they get the trigger before your opponent has a priority window. So maybe work it slightly differently. But the point being, I think the nerf should not be to the power or toughness or cost or battle skills, but rather some sort of requirement. When you build an Argenport deck, you should say, why am I not playing Tavrod? And there should be something to fill in there. So similar to the Dawnwalker change. I think it'll still see play. It'll bring its power level down, but it'll still see play. And it still has a similar kind of gameplay flow that it normally has. But other than that, I am very happy across the board with all of these changes. I think all of these changes are good. I think they're appropriate. I think they'll introduce more interactive gameplay, more decisions in deck building, and even opens up probably a whole new archetype with this Argenport Gunslingers. I think that will become a deck. So that's all for this patch. Hopefully they nerf Tavrod next time around, and I will see you for the next rundown when the next patch hits. Thanks for watching.